We all know this picture, we all know this girl. Yet do we know the story of how it came to be? In the early summer of 1984, an American photojournalist stepped into a refugee camp near Peshawar, Pakistan, and from there, one of the most infamous images in photojournalism was born. The girl with the piercing green eyes, haunted and telling the story of an Afghan refugee's fears, was destined to be world-renowned and has now since then become an emblem of the struggles of the Eastern world to the West. Haunted yet haunting, this pair of eyes which drew us all in belonged to a girl a mere 12 years old. Yet they had already witnessed more violence and suffering than any of us could imagine in a lifetime. However, this fear in her eyes is laced with defiance. As she stares so directly into the camera, we wonder if her fears truly arise from her being a refugee or the fact that a man she had never met before was taking pictures of her unconsented. The image, first released on the June 1985 cover of the National Geographic, was indeed stamped with the caption, "Her eyes telling the fears of an Afghan refugee." But how did this photojournalist come to know her exact source of distress? How could he tell simply behind the lens of his camera? He didn't even bother to learn her name, so for the first 17 years of this picture's existence, this unknown girl was referred to as the Afghan girl. This was her given identity. The picture then went on to become internationally recognized, with the CNN even calling it the world's most famous photograph. Everyone now knew this girl, the girl with the piercing green eyes, the Afghan girl, but simultaneously, we didn't know her at all. And no one cared to look deeper into the story, who she was, where she was. We simply just accepted this photographer's portrayal of her. In fact, her face then went on to become blown up into 20 by 24 large print and sold at a Christie's auction for $178,000 US. Clearly, her face was gaining traction internationally, generating revenue for various individuals and organizations. Yet, halfway across the world, she was still living in the same refugee camp, having limited access to basic necessities, including food, clean water, a proper education, or healthcare. Not a single dime of profit was given to her until after 17 years in 2002. Now, what this story reflects is a wider issue within photojournalism itself. The fact that the photo at the pinnacle of the photojournalism industry was not taken entirely by ethical means reflects the deficiency of enforcement mechanisms within the industry to prevent unethical behavior, and also the fact that the moral violations are often just being swept under the rug. This is further driven by the fact that in the competitive media industry, photojournalists are often pressurized to hunt for the most sensational images, often at the expense of the dignity of the individuals being depicted. Now, this brings me to my central question. To what extent is photojournalism exploitative rather than insightful and educational for the general public? How much longer can we allow photojournalists to continue to take advantage of their subjects under the guise of depicting the truth? In fact, it's even been stated that often newspapers purposefully display photos that are violent, gruesome, or tragically emotional in order to attract viewers. Yet this act of utilizing one's pain or suffering for the sole intent of personal and monetary gain seems unethical in of itself. Here, I'm not stating that all forms of representation of suffering in the media is unethical or must be banned, but that we must be more aware of the media we consume, actively questioning whether exploitation is at play, and being willing to discover more to the story than what we see on the surface, because we cannot simply accept what is spoon-fed to us. That being said, it would be unfair to claim conclusively that photojournalism is entirely negative, because then again, we would again only be addressing one side of the story. Regarding the image in the National Geographic, some would say that the subtle mistruth is justified considering the larger attention it brought to the plight of refugees in Afghanistan and more broadly across the world. The photo was damaging, yes, but also increased public awareness and donations to organizations such as the UNHCR, which reported heightened interest in their programs aiding refugees after the photo was released. This reflects that maybe regardless of the motive of the photo or the accuracy of the story being told, the fact that a story exists in of itself is beneficial for the victims in need of help. On top of this, the photojournalist who took the original picture did end up tracking down this girl in 2002, providing her with much needed financial support, healthcare, and also education for her children, which reflects that perhaps justice has been restored where it once was denied, and that photojournalism can come to aid its subjects rather than harm them. Unfortunately, despite the National Geographic's attempts to recompensate for their actions in the years since, the original photo still didn't tell you how she felt at that moment. It didn't tell you her life story. It didn't even tell you her name. Her name is Sharbat Gula, and Gula's experience hidden behind the lens reflects a much larger issue considering the exploitation of powerful visual stories today. It also reflects the need for more enforcement guidelines in order to promote ethical media and to ensure that individuals' humanities and integrities are put above all else. Similarly, we must also apply such guidelines to our own everyday lives. As phones become more and more prevalent in society, we too become photojournalists. In fact, it seems like a vacation isn't really a success until we've taken our it photo and posted our Instagram dumps. So it seems that photos are really everywhere. But the thing is, when we post something onto the internet, what we are presenting is a curated version of the truth, because we're portraying ourselves in a way that we want others to perceive, and that's not the entire truth. So whenever we see a photo online, we must remember to take it with a grain of salt. Our newfound capability of being able to take and share a photo instantaneously also comes with significant responsibilities, especially in times of crisis. We have to be aware that the bystander effect can be amplified with the growth of phones, in which, in times of crisis, we instinctively pull out our mobiles to record rather than assist the victims in the situation. What we are doing here is suddenly jumping into photojournalist mode, taking videos of an event to then take home to share to our family and friends over dinner while we state, "Guess what I saw today while I was on my way home on the tube?" But do we exaggerate the story? Do we put a filter on the video before we share it to social media for increased viewership? Because if yes, then we are shattering the fine line between spreading awareness of something ethically and violating the individual's humanity and integrity. Such a situation is exemplified in the New York subway incident, in which involved homeless man Jordan Neely, who was being restrained by a passenger and eventually strangled to death. The event was extensively recorded, and yes, of course, these recordings were crucial into piecing together the event's narrative. But it also raised very severe pressing questions, like, could more direct help have saved his life? Did our desire to record overshadow our moral imperative to intervene? And is it really ethical to take pictures of someone whose dignity was clearly being compromised at that moment? Well, these are all very difficult questions, and it really just reinforces the complex relationship between documentation and action. But first and foremost, we must remember that our approach should be guided by compassion and ethical considerations. To help us direct us towards this, we must ask ourselves one question above all, and that question being why. If we don't know why we are photographing something, then how will we know how to photograph it? The why must be followed by the how. And this is because when we share a photo, we have the responsibility to ensure that it transcends the surface level and provides narrative context and information to the audience we are perceiving it to. The Norwegian playwright Henrik Ibsen once stated, "1,000 words leaves not the same deep impression as does a single deed." And this has been overused and corrupted over time into the powerful but also misused term that a picture is worth 1,000 words. But what words? The words that a photojournalist wants you to hear? The words that you have created in your head based on assumptions and stereotypes you associate with someone's appearance? Because a photo cannot tell you the entire truth. And so it's up to us to look farther into the story, to look behind the picture, to see the entirety of the truth. So it's true that the ethics behind photojournalism often arises in complex and challenging situations where there is no definitive right or wrong. But above all, we must remember to prioritize the consent, the circumstance, and also the integrity of the individual. As photojournalists, it is up to us to depict the truth, the entire truth, and not just the truth shown behind the skewed lens of some camera. Thank you.